Okay, hello. So, first of all, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do as a job?
So, I work as a child psychologist, and for the last 15 years, maybe more, I have worked in working with children who've been traumatized by events such as bereavement, different crashes and similar things, and abuse.
Okay. And what do you mean by abuse?
Well, we all know about children who get hurt by other people. We're talking about abuse when it mainly applies to families. These are acts of omission and commission, i.e. Omission is when people don't do what the child needs, such as don't feed the children, so it's neglect, or don't protect them from danger. And commission is deliberate acts, such as physical abuse, hurting them, burning them, killing them. And of course sexual abuse would come into that. Yeah.
Okay, so what types of abuse have you dealt with?
But in Britain they divide abuse in different categories. Of course, most of the time you can't have one without the other. So if you start with physical abuse, hurting child physically in a deliberate way, of course it constitutes physical abuse, but not seeing the child's distress and the harm that has been inflicted on the child. It also means that they are emotionally abusive. The same would apply with sexual abuse. Children who have been sexually abused obviously have also been emotionally abused because they suffer emotionally and psychologically.
So there's a crossover between each?
There's an overlap, but usually they try to diagnose which bit of the abuse. The system tries to analyse that, and from which abuse children should be protected. One of the biggest problems and most important things is the emotional abuse and neglect. Now, neglect is usually by not providing for the child, as I mentioned before. You can neglect the child's needs for physical care, nutrition, emotional care, education, but these are much more difficult to deal with because they are often ingrained.
What type of therapy do you give? So obviously you said there's an overlap between different areas of abuse. How do you deal with each individual child?
You don't deal with an individual child. Obviously, in therapy we've used integration of several techniques within the systemic context. So the child doesn't grow up by itself, it grows up in family and community. So we try to address different parts of the family and the system and how it affects the child. So we work with the individual child. When they are little, we try to help them with their behaviours and management by the carers. We try to give them some play therapy. And later on we provide words psychotherapy, individual ones, but at the same time we work with the carers and we work with the dyads, that is the carer and the child. And then we would move on to family therapy, which usually involves the whole of the family that lives together, if we can get them together, and if there are not too many. And then we also work with the carers and carers groups, because carers need support and help so that they can provide good help and help the children to overcome their trauma. So I work with mothers of sexually abused children. I work with grandparents who are looking after children permanently. I work with carers of bereaved children, i.e. usually their mothers, who have been bereaved by suicide and murder and things like that.
And because you've dealt with the children,
I have seen the children, but I've also provided long-term support for the mothers who are bereaved and who are widows, which is another aspect of the work.
Okay. Do you have any experience working within the child protection system?
Child protection system in Britain is fairly complex. It starts with people being concerned about the child. They usually contact the social services, and social services then investigate with the help of the police usually. The child is often videoed with a statement about a particular incident. This is usually the deliberate acts such as physical abuse and sexual abuse. And then the social services, together with other people, decide that the child requires help and the family requires help, and that there is a risk. And they work with the families as a team, setting up different tasks. But however, if the case is very serious, and or they have been working with the family for a long time and no change is noticed, then the whole thing becomes a legal process, and it goes to court and is into care, what they call care proceedings. That is, that there is a threat, or in fact, in practice, the child has been removed from home.
Okay, and do you have any dealings with the court side of things when
yes,
that
I
happens?
do. My work currently, most of my work involves assessment of children and their families with respect to safety of the children, whether the children in fact should be living at home or should be living away from home, from their families. Sometimes these children are already away from their families, and it's about whether the children should be returned home.
So it's quite a difficult decision to make.
Yes. What happens is that the court appoints a guardian ad litem, which is a person who represents the interests of the child in court. And this guardian then actually appoints a solicitor for the child, and also various experts, including me, and I then see the child and the family and the child in different settings, and write a report, which is quite long. And then they often ask me to come to court and provide witness statements, and I'm examined on the case.
Do you think this system is effective?
You mean to protect children?
In order to protect children, yeah.
I don't think it will ever be 100% effective. I don't think it is 100% effective. In Britain we have a lot of scandals where children have been killed. There are cases of Baby P, of Maria Corwell, Victoria Klimbier. These are children who have died despite of the system. People have not noticed their bruises, they have been too soft with the families. But, of course, what we don't know is how many children have been saved and helped.
Would you say there's more protection now than there was 50 years ago? Or
oh, that's definite. I mean, I wasn't around 50 years ago. But, yes, that's for definite. And also, people now believe children much more. So, but also, they know more about about the mechanisms by which abusers maintain children's silence and frighten children and families into keeping secrets. And this is now fairly common. The other thing is that people are much more aware of the need by the children for having a normal family life, if at all possible. And of course most of the children, not all, want to live with their families and their parents, however inadequate they might be. So it is important that children are helped to live with those families, if at all possible.
Okay. What do you observe the differences to be between the Czech Republic and Britain in terms of foster care or children's homes?
Yeah, well, it goes with it. Um, when a child comes into care, which is either when they're born, because they're not wanted, which is actually very rare, then they are put up for adoption. Most of the time, older children come into care, and they go through the care proceedings, and it takes some time. Meantime, children live in foster care. Hardly any children are now in children's homes. I think in Leeds, which is a 1 million inhabitants, is something like 40 children in children's homes. All the other children, which is quite a few, several hundred, are living in foster care placements, supervised by social workers, and foster carers are trained and supervised and so on. They have got a system of reviews. Every 6 months it has to be reviewed with everybody, school, the carers, the social services, and sometimes with the parents as well. Or children also can come into foster care while the court proceedings are going on, and it is decided that the child will never return home, or it will never be safe. And so, in fact, the child is then placed for adoption, removed from the parents lose their parental rights, and the child is placed for adoption. And there are lots of organizations who will look out and train adopters and support them once the child is adopted.
Okay.
I think this is slightly different to Czech Republic, where, as far as I know, most children, whatever age, when they come into care, they go into children's homes. So they don't go into foster families.
And you think foster families is a more effective care environment?
No, I don't know. I think that foster families give chance to the children to experience family life, and also to develop attachments. Those children that come into care fairly young, they develop good relationship with their foster carers. The downside is that they might have to move, because most of our foster carers are trained and engaged for a short-term foster parents, which is up to about 6 months, and then we've got another lot of foster parents who would keep the children in long term. And what can happen is that the child comes into care, people think it will be short-term, and then it develops into longer term. But quite a lot of foster carers do want to keep the children for good, but they can separate as well.
Have you got any advice for any social work students, budding social workers?
I think my advice is that, in the first place, I think little babies under a year, should have care provided by one carer, which means that foster care in little babies is essential. The other thing is to work together. We work together with different professionals, whether it's pediatrician, child health, whether it's school, and various other support agencies. So get them together, talk to them, try to find solutions, and ask the parents and others what they actually need, what's needed, and who can fulfill it. Sometimes it's very simple, you know, they just need a cooker because they can't cook their meals. They don't need the removal of the child, but they need to be able to look after the child better.
So it's important to think about the individual needs of each family rather than jump to straight away taking the children.
Yes, but of course you can't do that forever. You can't support families forever. If you have to set targets and time limits by which you expect change, and you have to be there to help them, but also watch whether they are actually doing it. If they're not doing it, if you leave it too long, the damage to the child will be too big. Of course, when they are seriously harmful parents, such as with physical and sexual abuse, then I think that you can work with them, but most of the time it's unlikely that the situation will change as long as the perpetrator remains at home.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Okay.